Alright, we got some bad news. Everyone's in the house. We're all kind of stressing out real quick. Cody, what's going on?
Look at this.
Where is
it's not safe.
Oh, dude.
It's already smoking.
It's already smoking. We're at Goodspeed Performance. We're starting the engine build today. We're back with Cody.
What's up, guys?
Cody grew a beard since. It's actually been a minute. That's how we know how. Cody, what's going on here? You laying some O-rings.
We got the main bearings laid into the block and all of the O-rings that'll button up and keep the block sealed with each other. Keep the two halves together. Start getting everything laid out. We'll get the rods onto the crank. We'll get everything balanced inside of it, and then we'll come back and start assembling.
How do you place them in the engine? Do you decide with the weight?
Yeah, I just weigh them, and then I make a decision on where I want them.
I just want to take a second and say thank you so much to Goodspeed Performance. I just want to let you guys know that their address and phone numbers in the description. If you need your Subaru, your VW, your Audi, your Supra to be built, anything, hit them up if you're in the Phoenix Valley or neighboring in Arizona. They are amazing. They help me out with this. It would not be possible without them to build the Subaru engine. So huge shout out to them. I just wanted to give them some airtime and show my appreciation. And seriously, guys, hit them up. They know what they're doing. They're going to fully do it out for you, do it right, down to the details, so you have a strong engine that can push a lot of power and have a good time and go faster. So back to what we were doing.
We are going to be cutting all of the rings so that we can get them properly, get everything weighed properly. You always want to cut your rings before you do any weighing, because they will factor into your weight. Every piston has a top ring, a secondary ring, and an oil control ring.
Calculating the ring gap or something calculated?
Yeah, we're gonna calculate the ring end gap. We take rings and we'll set them in the hole. You want to get it at least a half an inch into the bore. I always just line it up to the face of the piston, and then we're checking the gap in between the end of the two ring, or the end of the one ring. So that's super tight. So we're gonna have to take a bunch out of this one.
What does looser end of things mean with rings?
It allows more gases, more everything to go by it. If you cut it too loose, it'll just burn a bunch of oil.
So we're building this thing, and it'll be normal to burn oil for anyone.
It shouldn't. I mean, yes, any engine will use oil, but it's not normal for an engine to use a bunch of oil. But yeah, we are setting it up a little bit looser than the factory does.
So once the ring is in there, Cody has, it looks like a
feeler gauge.
It looks like a situation you'd have for like gapping a spark plug, but you're just checking the gap with the rings.
And you want it to be a semi-tight fit, but not too tight. So that's the top ring. Then we'll move on to the secondary ring, which does require a little bit more gap than the top ring, but not much. It's only about 4 thousandths. And this is like honestly one of the more important parts of building your engine. If you don't get your ring gap right, you screw everything up later on. You never cut your oil control rings. You're only cutting the top ring and the secondary ring.
Which one's the oil ring?
The oil rings are this little wave ring and these two really small rings right here, and they go into the bottom slot of your piston.
You want those tight?
There's an end gap of like, I think it's like 15 to 50 thousandths, and you check the spec, but you can't cut the ring. So if the spec's not right, then you have to get new rings. So we've got everything balanced up, and we're gonna start with our main assembly.
And when Cody says balanced, the pistons, what are these called? The
wrist pins.
The wrist pins and
the rods are all weighed.
So if you have a really heavy rod, you put it with a lighter piston, etc., so it balances out.
This is something we do with performance stuff. They don't do this from the factory. They don't balance the engine from the factory. So this just makes sure that everything's running smoothly and there's no interference with anything.
Is that something that you can physically feel as a driver or not?
Yeah. If you know what you can feel vibrations in it. Most of it's taken away with the motor mounts, but like Evos and stuff, it's really important when you delete the balance shaft, because the balance shaft is what keeps everything in line and spinning properly, but the Subarus don't have that, so it's really important to make sure everything's balanced and rotating at the same mass. We've already checked all of our bearing clearances, and so now we're just going to start assembling.
I have a question about those.
Yep.
Does oil run in between those
oil,
two?
So oil only runs on this surface.
Mm-hmm.
The oil does not go onto this surface. This stays fixed in it, and then the crank rotates in between the bearing. So there's a layer of oil in between the bearing and the crank.
I see.
But not in between the bearing and the rod.
Got it.
Once you get all of your bearings, get all of your clearances set right and everything balanced properly, then stuff starts to go pretty quick, but that takes the majority of the time when you're building short blocks.
And if anyone's super new, when we say short block, we're talking about just the case with the pistons and rods and crankshaft. When we say a long block,
It includes heads.
long block includes the heads, which are over there, which we'll get to in a bit. So it sounds more drastic with words than it is, but it's pretty simple. It's something I had to question at first a long time ago.
This is a brand new crankshaft from Subaru. It's a nitrided STI style. I've already unpackaged it, cleaned it off. Make sure that there's no scores or anything in it. We've measured it. So we're just gonna start. The weird thing with these Subarus is most engines, you put the crank in the engine, in the block, and then you hang the rods and the pistons on it together. Subarus, you have to put the rods on the crank, and then put the engine together, and then you slide the pistons in from the sides. You don't need much of this stuff. Just a little bit to coat the bearing. It really helps. This is a Torco product. I like to use this stuff because it holds a very strong lubrication factor. Like you can spin the engine over, a bunch of times and it'll never, the bearing will never go dry. So it's not going to scratch all the coating off of it when you go to prime the oil pump and stuff.
And this is precaution just for first start.
This is just for starting it. As soon as the engine gains oil pressure, then all of the oil will wash all of this away. And that's another reason why you want to change your oil right after you do an initial startup, because you want to get all of this stuff out of the engine as fast as you can, because it can clog oil ports if you leave it in there.
So we get it all together, we start it, we get it idling. How long do you let it run before you do that first oil change?
We want to get it up to temp, and then we'll get it all the way up to temp, break in cams if we're doing cams or anything like that, and then we'll go drive it for about 5 miles, and then we'll do a full oil change on it. And you always want to make sure you're using break-in oil because of the factors. It has a bunch of zinc in it, and zinc's really good for everything to get broken in. Personally, I like to keep everything uniform and making sure that it's all facing the same way. I like putting, like the Manley emblem, all of them go forward. It just makes it better for my mind. Peace of mind. It really matters which way all of this stuff goes together. So if you put your cap on backwards, it's going to be really bad for it. It'll just destroy the bearing because these things are machined in one specific way. So, it has these little tangs on it, and every engine's different, but on EJs, they go on the same side. So it has this little block in there that kind of holds it on the metal of the rod and holds it from spinning in its spot. If you put it like this, then you are possibly out of round, and it'll just destroy the bearing almost instantly.
You're talking about the difference of this and that.
This little notch right here.
Yeah, I can see that somewhere.
Yeah, there's a little notch right there so that sits flush on the metal and it doesn't allow the bearing to spin. Always use the proper lubrication on your fasteners. We are using ARPs, so we'll be using some ARP grease. These are ARP 2000s, pretty standard rod bolt.
How would these bolts not vibrate loose inside the engine?
Because they're stretch bolts. So when you torque it down, it stretches, and the way that the metal stretches, it kind of twists it too, so it creates a tension on the bolt so that it can't spring itself loose. 90% of engines are built with those kind of bolts anymore. Like factory stuff is designed to stretch a lot, and all of the head bolt stuff is designed to stretch a little. I use a different set of rods usually, and their ARP 2000 torque is 43. These are a little higher. This is a slightly different bolt, so these are going to get torqued at 60. So once we torque them all, I like standing them up and just checking that all of them rotate smoothly. No binding, no clunks. And these feel pretty nice. Subarus tend to have a problem with when you change to an aftermarket rod, that the rod cap is a little bit beefier than the factory was, and they end up hitting down here in these channels. Every rotation it'll hit that, and it sounds like it's knocking. So I like to, before we even get the engine assembled and together, I like to just go and shave some of that metal off of there so that, you know, there's no possible way for it to get hit. Now you can see the difference of what I did. This one.
Oh, it has that
See
little like
these
trough.
ridges?
Yeah, that ridge.
And you just want to knock all the ridges down and get it nice and smooth.
That looks good. Bearings
Doing
seated.
the same thing with the main bearings. Get them nice and coated up so that they're protected during initial startup. Again, you don't want to use too much of this stuff. It can clog holes. Like for instance, take just a little bit of oil. This stuff, oil will, if you rub it together hard enough, it won't be there anymore. This stuff, it doesn't matter how hard you push on it, doesn't matter what you do to it, it'll always be there. Oil can go away, this stuff won't. I've actually seen an engine, I had a buddy that he put together a car, put a head on it. The head was assembled with this stuff. He put the head on it, got it running, forgot to put oil in it, drove the car home. It's about 40 miles to get home. Drove the car home, and it didn't lock up until he went to leave the next day. With no oil in it.
Just that stuff.
Just this stuff. Putting seals in before you torque everything down because it makes it like 50 times easier. You always want to just lube up your seal a little bit of oil in there. And you just kind of twist it in around the crank, and you can set the depth on it before you ever put the two together. You don't want to go too far, and you don't want to be too far out, but you don't want to be too far in either. There's like a perfect spot in the middle that you want to be, which is usually pretty difficult. And that's about where it'll sit. Now, I need to take some goop. This is just grit, ultra gray Permatex RTV. And we're just gonna take just enough to close the gap in between the engine when we go to put it together. This will prevent any oil leaks. Otherwise, if you didn't do this, you'd have oil leaking everywhere.
Just that little bit, huh?
Yeah, just the tiniest amount is all you need. And you want to be really careful that you don't get it, you know, you don't put too much so it doesn't go squirting into these holes, because these are all oil control holes. Oil flows through there, and if you block that oil passage, then you're not going to have a good day. So you get just a little bit amount on the metal, but you can't see the shininess of it anymore. So you got to get it to stand up just right, so it doesn't fall over while you're trying to put them together.
And we didn't put it on this side.
No, you only need to
on that
put it
side.
on one side. You don't need to coat both sides. Coating the bolts with some ARP grease just to make sure that they torque and stretch properly.
What bolts are these though?
These are the case bolts. These are what hold the block together.
You know,
You have any thoughts, John?
I was just wondering why Cody just sounds so frustrated when he talks about the bolts. These are the case bolts, and you know, this is what holds it together, and we're just putting some. Stop it! You don't want to come across like that.
Doing great till you said something. All right?
Build a real car or something.
Oh! Oh!
It's okay, man. You know what? Cody just needs more vacation time.
You can take me to Japan next year too.
Dude, if you want to go, you want to pay for it.
These are a special torque. They are an angle torque. But we want the finishing torque to be somewhere around 37, 38 foot-pounds.
What's an angle torque?
It's stretching the bolt.
Oh.
So you torque it to a specific number, and then you turn it, say, 45 degrees or 90 degrees past that point. So there's not really a specific torque number for it, but I know what it should be, around what it should get to. And remember how we just put a little bit of silicone on there?
Mm-hmm.
See how it just beads out just ever so slightly?
Yup. That looks OEM right there. Even better.
That's the goal. So we're gonna put all the rings on the piston. This is your, I call it a wave ring, but it's your oil control ring. And there's a certain way that these rings all go on. If you decide to do this, it comes with your pistons and you can look at it. They're all different materials too. The top ring, the second ring, and the oil rings are all different.
We got one side in. I wanted to watch how that went down. Cody, you just rubbing some grease in there on
Just
the oil on the sidewalls. Now you've got your, what is that called? A ring?
This is a ring compression tool. It basically compresses the cylinder ring so that it gets down to the size of the cylinder.
Then we can push it down.
Just like that. Then we have to put in a wrist pin. I'm trying to put some oil on here too. Everything needs a little bit of lubrication.
This is what connects the piston to the rod.
Yeah. Locking clip that holds it in there. That's it.
Cool.
Move on to the next one. See how it comes all the way up now? Almost all the way up.
Oh, that's awesome. What is this?
Liquid Teflon.
Teflon, put all the bolts back. He's throwing the short block on the engine stand. We got the bigger head studs over here. So they did machine the block for those heads, but we gotta do the...
You gotta ream the heads out to accept the bigger stud.
Yeah, ream the heads out. It's called reaming them out. Just make them a little bigger to make those work. So we can hold more power.
The heads are where all the magic happens. That's what makes an engine work, really. It has valves. Let air in, let air back out. Spark plugs. Cams. So the cams house the timing. Make sure that, you know, all the cylinders are firing when they're supposed to.
Which I've been having the conversation over and over is, why didn't you do any work to the heads? Why didn't you do this and that? And why didn't you get cams? Well, we're out of money, fam. We are out of money, so don't want to hear it. We're going to just run it and then have some fun with it. And then maybe in a couple months, if things go like they should, we can do something even crazier. But for now, we're cruising.
Just putting a little bit of oil on the threads and threading the head studs into the block.
We got this side completely done. I watched most of it and I wanted to check it out, so we're going to show this side working with the head studs. And oh, you got some motor mounts out? We're going to put those on later? Cool. I'm interested in how those are going to feel in the cab.
Horrible.
Really? Like bad? Like I'm going to regret it.
They're gonna shake the whole damn car. Guaranteed.
What are those little guys? Are they washers?
Yeah, they're washers for the nuts on the head studs.
Oh, is this what comes in the kit of the head studs? These little...
Yeah, those are the nuts.
Oh, these are cool. What size socket do you use? This is like a 10 or, a 14?
Yeah, it's a 14, 12 point.
Putting some grease on.
Yep. Same thing as you did with the rod bolts, you do with the head studs.
What are these called?
These are buckets. Fill the gap in between the valve and the cam. You get like hydraulic roller cams or you get flat tappet cams. These are flat tappet. Meaning you just got a flat cup that it rides across and pushes down. A roller style would have a roller bearing in it so that it doesn't have constant wearing fix.
More bearings.
More lube. These don't actually get bearings. The head surface is the bearing. So the cam just rides in between this metal. This is a factory, it's not really an oil cooler, you call it a heat exchanger. So it matches, it's really for cold starting think it'll warm the oil up quicker because there's coolant that runs through the outside of it.
Because the coolant heats up way faster.
Yeah. But the coolant, it kind of just equalizes the temperature between the two, keeps the oil and the coolant around the same temperature. And what we're putting on is an external oil cooler.
Header gaskets. Just got them on. Cody's gonna go grab the headers. Put those on next.
Doing the same thing on the valve cover that we did the block. You don't have to do this, but it really helps with oil leaks because it's a sideways engine.
Yeah.
Those are cam sensors.
And then this is the oil line.
Yes, that is what, remember that valve that we just put on the bottom? This is the same thing, but it controls the intake valves.
That's a wrap for the day. Got the car all dusty right here. It sat outside for a long time. I meant to throw that rag back. But we made some progress. I'll show you the shelf of what we have left to put on the car. A long day. We got the intake manifold, which, keeping that stock right now, that's the old crank. We got some timing, these are the timing, this is the timing,
Disqualification valve.
disqualification valve? Come on, man. Is that a cam gear? Is that what that is? Are you jacking with me? Cam gear. I don't know what I was saying, but we're stopping here for the day. Tomorrow we'll get the rest bolted on, intake manifold and all that. That was on the shelf, and gonna figure out some turbo stuff. Might be getting stuff, might not. And we're getting this car running ASAP. So I will see you guys on the playlist that's on the screen, and more Subi stuff coming